Right, so I submitted a Freedom of Information request to TfL, Transport for London, to find out what cars were scrapped in the most recent London scrappage scheme. Today, Monday, 7th of October 2024, I have received a response. And in this video, I will be diving deep into that list. And it's quite an extensive list of cars. And I'll be revealing some of those cars that we've lost because of this scheme. But first, let me give you a little bit of background on the scrappage schemes. So they've been around for a while now, and you know, they might seem like, you know, they're part of a well-meaning effort to clean up the air, but they can also be a real danger to the world of classic cars and collectible cars. And for those of us who love cars that have a bit of history and character, the idea of amazing potential future classic cars being crushed into oblivion is heart-wrenching, to be honest with you. I've talked about this before. Back in 2022, I actually did a write-up in a video, and I warned about the risks that is posed to automotive heritage because of schemes like the ULEZ Scrappage scheme. In fact, I'll put the link to that article below so you can check that out. But I will tell you from that time that at that time, when I researched the previous scrappage scheme, it turned out that we lost cars like the BMW 2002, the Audi Quattro, yes, the original Quattro, 9 Triumph Spitfires, several MG Midgets, 731 classic Jaguars, including 45 of the beautiful XJS model as driven by Ian Ogilvy's Saint Simon Templar in the TV series of the 70s. There was also Honda Integra Type Rs, Ford Capris, Lancia Deltas, Lancia Beta Spiders, the Fiat X19 models, and even solid 1980s Mercedes S-Class and SEC coupes, plus there were many, many others as well. So now it's all happened again. Of course, we've had the ULEZ scheme, ULEZ expansion that happened last year. The most recent scrappage scheme, in fact, began on the 30th of January 2023, and it was linked to that ULEZ expansion, which happened, of course, at the end of August 2023 to cover the whole of Greater London. And the scheme itself, the scrappage scheme, ran until the 8th of September 2024. And of course, it was introduced to encourage Londoners to ditch the older, higher emission vehicles that they may have been running at the time and to go for greener options such as hybrids and EVs and stuff like that, or just cars that complied with ULEZ. Of course, this scheme applied to cars that did not comply with the ULEZ requirements. And in fact, it wasn't just cars, it was motorbikes and also some vans and buses that were also eligible for getting grants under this scrappage scheme. So basically, all of those vehicles owned by Londoners, but to be eligible for the grant, the cars had to be owned by those people for at least a year. And they had to be roadworthy. They had to be roadworthy and therefore in use, right? Because the other requirement was that they had to have a valid MOT and they had to have insurance. So these cars weren't the sort of cars that were just old bangers that were actually genuinely ready for the scrap heap. No, they were cars still in service. They were still being driven and they still had life left in them. Now, later on in this scheme, they did introduce a vehicles for Ukraine option. This, of course, in light of the fact that so many vehicles have been lost during the war that's happening in Ukraine. So they introduced a vehicles for Ukraine option. And that meant that some applicants were able to donate their vehicles to Ukraine for humanitarian and medical use rather than have them crushed. And don't forget that the scheme had initially required that you go and crush your vehicle first before you then submit it to get a grant and stuff like that. Now, the data that I received from TfL includes those vehicles that were donated to Ukraine, but unfortunately it doesn't filter them out of the entire scrappage figures, so it doesn't make clear which one of those were saved and which ones were scrapped. But the thing is that if you think about it, frankly, it's more likely that the ones that were sent to Ukraine were probably vans, 4x4s and commercial vehicles, because that's the sort of vehicle that they would need for the purposes that they have for them. And it wouldn't necessarily have covered passenger cars, and certainly not anything that would be classed as classic or collectible, I don't think. By the way, you can still, the scrappage scheme obviously is finished, but you can still donate your vehicle if you want to go, oh, my vehicle is done, I'm getting rid of it, it's not worth anything, but it's still got life left in it, and you want to donate your vehicle to Ukraine, you can do so. Just Google British Ukrainian Aid, and there's more information there. Anyway, putting aside all the vehicles that went to Ukraine or are going to Ukraine, let's focus on the fact that many of these cars, like I said, were indeed crushed and killed well before their time, I would say, in some of these cases. And I've got to raise this concern about the notion of scrapping perfectly usable and roadworthy cars, because I personally believe that this is a case of deliberate wastage. I mean, here are resources that went into creating these cars, and the best thing that we should do with resources and with cars, the most environmentally friendly cars, as has often been said, are the cars that are used right to the end of their life, so that the dust-to-dust carbon impact of those cars is greatly reduced, because, you know, they will have paid their carbon debt by the time they're eventually killed off. But these cars, many of them still had life left in them, and they weren't exactly tired old bangers that were ready for, like I said, the scrap heap. In fact, as you'll see, some of these were definitely, undoubtedly, potential future classics and collectibles that could have lived on and would have been cherished. So on August the 20th, of 2024, this year, I did me personally submitted a Freedom of Information request to TfL, and I asked the question, could I please have a full list of the makes and models of passenger cars that have been scrapped under the current ULEZ Scrappage scheme? And like I said, today, Monday, 7th of October 2024, I got an answer. As part of that answer, TfL stated that the data provided lists the make and models of passenger cars which have received a grant payment under the car and motorcycle scrappage scheme. Which, of course, you know, that confirms that these cars have either been scrapped or they've been sent to Ukraine. In fact, during the process of that scrappage scheme, that current or previous scrappage scheme, 54,000 applications were processed. So that's potentially 54,000 vehicles that were scrapped. And £186 million was handed out in grants for those cars. Remember that there were grants of up to £2,000 available for individuals scrapping their own car for them to buy another car. Now, I do have the full list. Now, I'll put the full list on my website, browncarguy.com, because frankly, it's huge, you know, and it just take a day to go through all of them. So I'll put the link to that also below in the description. But in this video, what I'll do is I'll look at I'll go through the list and I'll look for the key cars. Like I said, the potential classics and collectibles that we have lost to this scrappage scheme. And I'll do that right after this.
A brown car guy.
Right, so at the top of this list, you'll see 120 vehicles that were scrapped, cars and bikes, for which there is no make and model data. So unfortunately, we'll never know what those specific 120 vehicles were. But there were 120 vehicles that were scrapped before we can even get into which cars have fallen victim to this scrappage scheme. The other problem with this list is that they didn't put a model year or year of manufacture on the list. So that will make it a little bit harder to identify the classics, but as you'll see, we certainly can easily spot a few of them. And Alfas, for example, Alfa Romeos, they always fall into the category, or nearly always fall into the category, don't they, of potential classic and collectible cars? Well, I can tell you that there was a total of 140 Alfa Romeos that were lost in this scrappage scheme. And we're talking 147s, we're talking 8 156 models, mostly diesels. Actually, there were a lot of diesels on this list of Alfas, but there were 3 156 1.8 T-Spark models. And more sadder than that is that there was the increasingly rare, and I would say definitely a collectible now, the 166 luxury saloon. You remember those? 2 of those were lost. There was also a couple of Alfa GTVs and 8 spiders were lost. Oh. There were a ton of Audis. Again, mostly diesels. Just to clarify, remember that diesels were particularly hard hit by that last ULEZ expansion because it required cars, diesel cars, to be Euro 6 emission standards, which meant that basically anything older than 2015 in terms of diesel cars was simply not compliant. That was a very, very clear cutoff for diesel cars. So basically it was anything older than 2015 was definitely never going to be compliant. Whereas on the other hand, it was a little bit more flexible for petrol cars because they needed to be Euro 6. And that means most cars, nearly all, well, that means pretty much all cars back to 2005, but in some cases, even cars going back as far as the late 90s are actually compliant with those emission standards, although they may not be listed on the TfL checker on the website, and in some cases you would have had to get a certificate of conformity from the manufacturer, which I guess most people have done by now for those cars to be on the list if they are on the list. Anyway, let's get back to Audis. And I did see on this list one car listed as just Quattro. And that worries me because could that have been an Quattro, an original Quattro? Because it didn't say anything else, it just said Quattro. I'd hope not, but it's possible. I will tell you that there were 4 S3 Quattros and 2 S4 Quattros on the list, plus over 20 Audi TT sports cars. And considering that the TT has now been discontinued, I mean, that's now a classic, right? Or will be. Hey, are you liking this video? Then make sure that you hit the like button. That's really important. Also, tell everybody. There was one unnamed Bentley. Wow. Somebody scrapped a Bentley for just, well, at most £2,000. Gosh, that makes you think, doesn't it? Again, there were loads of BMWs. In fact, there were 2,987 BMWs, nearly 3,000 essentially usable BMWs taken off the used car market. And don't forget, this is another way of looking at it. That's 54,000 cars that have been taken off the used car market, which of course, used cars are already expensive, and that's 50,000 less available now. And that will lead to a shortfall in an era where we're already experiencing a shortfall because of the loss of cars that we already had during the COVID shutdown. So anyway, but having said that, like I said before, with the Audis, same thing with the BMWs, most of these were diesels, but even amongst BMW diesels, there are potentially fun diesels that have been killed off. I mean, you know, if you've got an E46 diesel, you know, there's a lot you can do to it to make it very, very quick and enjoyable indeed. Anyway, there were some petrols, there was convertibles, there were M Sport models, but get this, 35 BMW Z3s were killed. Now, okay, you may not be a Z3 fan. They were never liked when they came out that much, but they're getting to look more and more appealing now. And don't forget that they are a fun little starter roadster for many people, right? Moving on from BMWs, we're going to look at some Americans now. And in fact, 2 Cadillac Seville STS V8 saloons. They have been scrapped in this scrappage scheme. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, those are rare enough as they are to even find in the UK, and 2 of them were just killed off. And actually, they're kind of cool. I tell you what's even cooler. Similarly, 2 Chrysler 300C SRT with the powerful Hemi V8 engines, they were also lost. I mean, those are definitely cool cars, and that is really, really sad to hear. 3 Daimler V8 saloons, definitely potential classics. They have been lost. A definite classic, guaranteed, no doubt, no question about it, a Fiat 126 BIS. That was lost. Plus a Fiat Barchetta and a Fiat Coupe 16 valve turbo. Oh no! What about Cinquecentos? Do you think that they're classics? Well, yeah, actually, yeah, because they have a bit of a cult following. Well, 10 of those were killed off by this. How about Fords? Especially when you think that older and fast versions of Fords are generally on the rise in terms of values lately. Looking at the list, fortunately, I don't see any Cosworths or anything like that, but I saw a Cougar V6, the Cougar sports car V6, that was lost. A Fiesta ST is on the list. Granada Scorpio, I got a soft spot for those. Plus, oh man, Mondeo ST200 and a Mondeo ST24. I mean, those are actually really good fun cars to drive. And there's also A Mustang, a Ford Mustang listed on here as well. One Ford Mustang. It doesn't say what year, so I just hope to God that it was that Mustang 2 that everybody hates and not one of the cool ones. Ah, and Pumas. Oh my God. And I'm guessing this can only mean the old original Puma. You know, those really fun little sports cars, sort of Ford's version of a Honda CRX, if you like. And not the newer ones because they're just too new to be scrapped. And that's a family SUV. These are the original Puma. There's 35, I believe it's the original Puma. 35 of them are listed as having been killed. And some of those appear to be special editions. Oh man. There's several Sierras also. I mean, okay, you're probably thinking Sierras, I mean, who cares about them? Then they weren't the special ones. But on the other hand, when you have cars like Sierras, they are starting, just by the fact that, you know, they were so popular in the UK, they are starting to enter into classic status. I mean, think about Cortinas before them. Any Cortina is a classic, right? Hi guys, I've been writing. This is my first book, a novel, an all-out action thriller, and this one is a collection of 13 stories I've written over the course of 2 decades. The ULEZ Files and the Quantum Races by BC Guy are out now on Amazon.com. Similarly, the Honda Blade. I mean, you may not even remember the Honda Blade, but you may remember the Triumph Acclaim. Well, the Triumph Acclaim was actually a rebadged Honda Blade. So the Honda Blade, the Triumph Acclaim is rare, the Blade is even rarer, and one of them is gone. That would have been collectible for sure, but it's been crushed. Several Civic Coupes, Honda Civic Coupes, and oh no, a CRX. I used to own a CRX, 1988 proper one. But this one, I really hope it's the later Del Sol version. I could forgive that, but the original, losing an original CRX, that hurts. And 2 Honda Legends. Oh man, I mean, those cars were epic at the time. And I do hope that they weren't the older, original, cool shaped ones. And hopefully they were the later ones, which weren't as cool, but still, Honda Legend. Plus Preludes, the Honda Prelude. And Honda is about to bring back the Prelude, but Preludes were lost, 6 of them, including the 2.2 VTI. And that was a great Prelude. Oh, many Jaguars and many Jaguar S-Types, again this time, have been killed. Most of them were diesel, but there were some V6 models on the list and at least one V8 S-Type I saw. There were also 2 more. Remember I said right at the beginning in the intro how many XJSs were lost, the car that Ian Ogilvy's Simon Templar drove in the TV series. I had a white Corgi one. Did you have one of those? Well, 2 more of those are listed on that. So the 2 more have been lost. XJR, an XJR was listed on that, and 5 XK models. 5 XK models, including 2 XKRs. Oh my God. I mean, I would have one of those. That is definitely a future classic. Over 500 Land Rovers were lost. But having said that, hopefully, because of what they are, I'm hoping that a good proportion of those probably went to Ukraine, are still running around over there. One Lada Cossack is listed on this list, and that's basically a Lada Niva 4x4. So again, it's a bit of a tragic loss because although they're crude cars, but they're tough as nails, you know, and iconic in their own way. Here's another definite rare classic, a really significant iconic car of its time, a game changer, no doubt about it, the Lexus LS400. Well, 12 of those were killed. I mean, the engine alone on those is worth saving. I mean, wow. We lost 5 of the quirky little Mazda MX-3 sports cars, sadly. But this next figure will shock you. 90 Mazda MX-5 Roadsters, one of the most popular and affordable, fun roadster sports cars that you can buy. 90 of those were lost. And another rare classic from Mazda, an MX-6 2.5 GT. That was also scrapped. There were well over 3,000 Mercedes models lost, including the now classic, I would say, 190 models, some SLKs, SL, and even 3 S500 models. Around 20 MG and MGTF Roadsters were also killed, plus a bunch of those modern Minis. They've also been killed on this, well, mostly diesels, but there was at least one Cooper S on that list. But forget that. This next one is another shocker. One Mitsubishi 3000 GT 4-wheel drive 4-wheel steering. That was a technological marvel and a Japanese legend of its day, and that was also crushed. My goodness. 15 Peugeot 205 models were crushed. Okay, they may not have been the GTIs, but when you think about it, still saddens me because when you think about cars like that, 205, and you think about people that are running 205 GTIs, it gets harder and harder to find parts and bits for those cars. And when you get the original ones, a lot of the trim and stuff will be shared. And you know, you could save those cars, give them to the classic community, and use those to get classic GTIs or 205 GTIs, you know, going again. So it's really sad when you hear that 15 205 of those classic little hatchbacks, little French hatchbacks were lost. Sticking with Peugeots, you remember the 406 Coupe? I mean, I recently mentioned that in another video about, you know, cars that are now cool. I mean, these were, let's be honest, the most beautiful cars this side of Ferrari, really. I mean, they were just absolutely stunning. Well, 6 Peugeot 406 Coupes have been lost. 5 Porsches were also on this list. 4 Boxsters and 1 rather rare 924, and 924s are going up in value now. 2 Renault 5 models, Renault 5s also crushed, plus a Renault 9, Renault 19s, Renault 21, and even a Renault 25. And I do shudder a little because I saw a Renault Clio Sport also listed on that, and I was just wondering which one that might be. Rover Metros, you remember the one that came after the Mini and the one that a lot of us of my generation learned to drive on, BSM Metros, I certainly did. Well, they've also been going up in value because there's so few of them left now, but another 10 were killed off by this. And also that includes the later rebadged 100 models. Even classic Minis have been killed off. Classic Minis! I mean, they're becoming worth a fortune now, right? Classic Minis have been killed off, at least 3 that I could see, including a Mayfair and a Mini 30. Wowzers. And sticking with Rovers, the 216 Coupe, which was like a Honda Civic Coupe, there were some 600 series models. They were also killed. Those were based on the Honda Accord. And lots of diesel versions of the Rover 75. Remember that? Came out as a rival to the Jaguar Type S, or S-Type I should say. The Rover 75, I actually preferred the Rover 75. I always enjoyed it for the sheer creamy comfort of that thing. And you really felt special driving it. 2 Rover Sterlings were also killed, and the Rover Sterling, remember, that was basically a Rover rebadged version of the Honda Legend. Over 20 Saab 900s were killed, including a couple of turbos. Oh, wow. And several Seat Leon Cupra Sports, and even a petrol Skoda Octavia VRS. Now, I know I said recently in another video that these are not cool anymore, but still, it was a great car to drive. 8 Suzuki Jimnys were killed. And a bit like the Lada Niva I mentioned earlier, they're not the greatest models because these Jimnys are probably the older models, not the new ones that came out a few years ago. But they normally, they just go on and on and on. They never die. They just keep scurrying around doing their duties forever. So it's a real shame that we've lost that. Over 20 Toyota Celicas, including 10 VVTi models. I mean, surely these will definitely be having their day very soon as collectible classics, and certainly another collectible classic from Toyota, the MR2 mid-engine sports car. 10 of those were killed. And what about 3 Toyota Hilux and 2 dozen or so Toyota Land Cruisers also lost? Now these are cars that we thought, and as demonstrated famously by Top Gear one time with the Hilux, these are cars that we thought are unkillable. There was one special edition Land Cruiser even called Invincible, and yet we killed them. Or I do hope maybe they ended up in Ukraine. Another car that I recently, admittedly I did say that it wasn't cool anymore in another video, but still it was historically significant. That is the sleek Vauxhall Calibra Coupe. 4 of those were lost, plus 3 Vauxhall Omegas. I used to have a soft spot for those, and 7 little Tigra sports cars also killed. 35 Volkswagen Beetles or so also on this list, but let's hope that they weren't the classic original Beetle, because it doesn't really clarify, but that they were actually the modern reincarnation of them, and you know, maybe we won't shed so many tears. But more astonishingly, and probably more depressingly, around 70 Volkswagen Golf GTI models were also on the list and therefore presumed killed, including one listed as a GTI 16 valve, which must refer to the Mark II. Oh, man. Oh, and 8 Volkswagen Siroccos also lost. Finally, we come to Volvo. And again, in another video, I've just mentioned the Volvo 240, saying just how cool those cars are now, because it's a tank of a thing and it was just built to outlive humans, well, like most Volvos. Well, 6 of those were crushed. 6 of those, plus several 740s. In fact, the first car I ever reviewed back in 1990 was a 740. 740s were killed, and even some 850s, including 3 850 T5 models. In fact, 934, nearly 1,000 Volvos potentially were destroyed in this culling for ULEZ. And like I said before, these older Volvos, they were engineered and built to outlive humanity, let's be honest, until we came along and, well, we've killed them. So that's sad. So now basically I'm going to go away and basically shed some tears over these cars and have a quiet moment of tribute and commemoration for these lost valiant cars that have gone to the great autodrome in the sky, I would say. There are probably some that I missed, because it is a huge list. So what I would say is that like I said, I'll put the link in the description. They'll put the full list onto my website. Go check it out, go through it, and if you spot any others that I've missed, put them in the comments below. Anyway, I'll catch you in the next video. Make sure that you like, share, comments, and subscribe, and keep it locked to Brown Car Guy for more information on the motoring world like this. Shout out time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, if you enjoy my content, why not get involved? Buy me a coffee. You can do that at either of these links. Or if you're watching on YouTube, buy me a thanks or take out a membership. It all helps. It really does.